So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! The Detroit Lions have the opportunity to shake up the free agency market this year and go after a big player splash superstar signing. And it's something they've never really done before, right? In Brad Holmes' first year as the general manager, they were expected to be the worst team in the NFL, and they very nearly were. They started 0-10-1 to finish the year 3-13-1, and the free agency period going into that season wasn't very good. Not a single free agent got more than a 2-year contract, and not a single free agent got more than $3 million on average a season, that being Jamal Williams, who got a pretty decent contract, but nothing incredible or over the top. The Detroit Lions, they went 3-13 that year and had a lot of problems from talent to depth and really just all around weren't a very good roster. The year after that, Brad Holmes goes into free agency and he finds a couple big guys, right? He finds DJ Chark for a value at wide receiver. He finds guys like Deshaun Elliott for a good deal from Baltimore. He finds a couple of guys that can come in and a couple players that can start and contribute while continuing to build through the draft. But he got a little bit more aggressive in year two. The Detroit Lions finished 9-8. So going into last season, Brad Holmes got even more aggressive in free agency as he signed Cam Sutton to a 3-year, $33 million contract. He gave David Montgomery a 3-year, $18 million contract. He was aggressive in free agency, got superstar names like David Montgomery, like CJ Gardner-Johnson, like Cam Sutton, and they turned out to be pretty impactful players for the Detroit Lions this year, but they still haven't really broken the bank yet, right? They haven't signed a guy for more than $11-12 million. That is kind of the upper echelon of free agency, but they've never ever under Brad Holmes even looked at a guy for $15, $16, $17 million out of free agency, with the Detroit Lions being just one half away from a trip to their first ever Super Bowl this past season. There is not a better time for the Detroit Lions to go make a splash. There is not a better time for Brad Holmes to get even more aggressive and continue to ramp up his use of free agency than this offseason for the Detroit Lions. And that doesn't necessarily mean sacrificing the future. That doesn't necessarily mean trading for a guy like Max Crosby for multiple first-round picks. These are guys that could very well be in free agency, be options for the Detroit Lions that they might spend quite a bit of money on, but could bring a superstar element to the Lions and be the final missing piece to the puzzle that puts them over the top of the hill and puts them in the Super Bowl. So today, I have 4 players that I think will be free agents or at least have a good opportunity of being free agents, as well as guys the Lions could potentially be interested in and could be willing to make that first superstar an offer. So with that being said, these players I understand are unlikely to come to Detroit. They are even potentially unlikely to join the free agent market. But if they make it to free agency, I do think there is an opportunity, and I do think they are players that Brad Holmes will potentially be looking at. The first player we're going to take a look at today is Baltimore Ravens defensive lineman Justin Madubuike. After a season where he put up 13 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 33 quarterback hits, and 33 quarterback pressures, he was a constant force on the interior of the Baltimore Ravens defense, and pairing him up with Aleem McNeil would potentially give the Detroit Lions the best interior defensive line duo in the entire NFL. 2 guys that could realistically go for 8, 9, 10 plus sacks a season. Pairing them with Aiden Hutchinson and potentially James Houston or a rookie on the edge could be massive for the Detroit Lions. And I think Justin Madubuike could be a really, really good player for the Detroit Lions. He's a guy that I think would fit the Lions system really well. Somebody that would have the opportunity to play against or play across from an elite defensive lineman and Aleem McNeil in his own right. And I think it would make the Detroit Lions one of the more sustainable, one of the stronger, and one of the younger and more talented defensive lines in football. Aiden Hutchinson's on his rookie contract. Aleem McNeil is still on his rookie contract. You have James Houston, who's still on a rookie contract. You have a lot of young players and a lot of young talent on that defensive line. So why not splurge for a year or two? Why not sign Justin Madubuike to that 14, $15 million contract to come in and be a dominant pass rusher, a dominant interior defensive lineman for the Detroit Lions. And then again, if you address it in the draft, right, if you address the edge rushing position in the draft, you could have a defensive line of, let's just say, Aiden Hutchinson, Justin Madubuike, Aleem McNeil. And then on the other side, you could potentially have a guy like, potentially if you want to trade up for a guy like Jared Verse, or you trade up for a guy like Chop Robinson, or you go with the guy from Memphis who's supposed to be a late first, early second round pick, right? That would be a great defensive line unit for the Detroit Lions, and I think would bring them so much success from the front four. I think that would lean in a lot to what Aaron Glenn likes to do, because Aaron Glenn last season blitzed a lot out of necessity and not a lot because he necessarily wanted to or because that was his scheme, but he had to from necessity. If you get a guy like Justin Madubuike, potentially a high draft pick at edge rusher, whether that be at 29, whether that be in the second round, that would leave Aaron Glenn with so many more options and so many more opportunities to scheme the defense the way he wants and potentially have the Lions as a top 15 to top 10 unit. But I don't think Justin Madubuike is the only player that the Lions could be interested in, as Brian Burns, I think, is actually quite likely to hit the free agency market. A player that last year totaled 50 tackles for the Carolina Panthers, 16 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery in 16 games. The rift between Brian Burns and the Carolina Panthers organization is not one that is being kept secret very well. It is very clear and very obvious that he has some disagreements with management, that he potentially doesn't want to be a Carolina Panther anymore. And I think if there is going to be a superstar to hit the free agency market this year, it will be Brian Burns. And I think there's a good opportunity for the Lions to go out and get Brian Burns for a price that might not be nearly as expensive as a lot of people think, right? I think the two big star edge rushers from this class are going to be Josh Allen and Brian Burns. I think there's a great opportunity that Josh Allen returns to Jacksonville for a massive contract. They still have a rookie on they still have a quarterback on a rookie contract, and I think they can afford to keep Josh Allen. However, I think the Carolina Panthers just might not want to keep Brian Burns. Not so much that they can't, not so much that they can't afford it. I'm not sure Brian Burns is going to sign the contract to stay in Carolina and therefore will potentially be on the open market. And what better opportunity for Brian Burns than to go to a team that needs an edge rusher? He'd be the easy edge rusher too and really be the perfect complement for Aiden Hutchinson. I think he would see career high success in the Detroit Lions. The Lions have the 7th most cap space in the NFL. Again, much like the Justin Madubuike situation, that would make the Lions defensive line really strong going into the 2023 season with Aiden Hutchinson, Brian Burns, Aleem McNeil, and potentially a drafted defensive tackle, or, you just stick with John Kaminsky and Josh Pascal at that rotation. That is a really good defensive line, and it should be able to get you quite a few sacks. Now, Brian Burns has only gotten 10 plus sacks one time in his NFL career, which could potentially bring down his value a little bit. Not because he's not a good player, but because statistically he hasn't quite been able to show up. He hasn't had a great rushing mate. He hasn't had a great defense around him to get those superstar numbers. But on Detroit, he very much could. With pressure going towards Aiden Hutchinson, with focus going towards Aleem McNeil, Brian Burns could see a lot of one-on-one production for the Detroit Lions, could see a lot of one-on-one matchups. And I think if the Lions offer him a fair contract, right, $14, $15 million a season, which is where he's projected on Spot Track right now, I think he could be a really good player for the Detroit Lions. I think he could be super effective. He could see career high numbers, get the bag, get on a really good football team, potentially play for a Super Bowl within the next season. I think it would be a perfect fit for the Detroit Lions, not having to give up first-round picks and not having to give up any draft capital to go and get a superstar pass rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. Now, the defensive line is just one area of focus for the Detroit Lions, as the other one is going to be in the secondary. And there are 2 splash free agents this year. I'm not sure either one is going to be available, but I will talk about them because I think if they are available in free agency, I think there's going to be a good chance the Lions go after him. The Lions were very, very aggressive in free agency last year at the cornerback position. They signed Cam Sutton to a 3-year, $33 million contract, which was major for the Detroit Lions and the biggest free agency contract Brad Holmes has ever given out, as well as giving a 1-year, $6 million contract to Emmanuel Moseley to be the cornerback 2. Neither of those picks really worked out. Neither of those signings really worked in the Detroit Lions' favor, as Cam Sutton really is supposed to be more of a cornerback 2. And of course, Emmanuel Moseley got injured early in the season. So I think if there is a superstar cornerback on the market, Brad Holmes, for the second year in a row, will spend big money at the cornerback position to get the best guy for the position, whether that be Bears cornerback Jalen Johnson, who last year had 36 tackles, 4 interceptions, 10 passes defended, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery at about $16 million on average a season, or whether that be L'Jarius Sneed, the cornerback from the Kansas City Chiefs, who just had 78 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 14 passes defended, and will cost roughly $16.3 million on the open market. I think either one of these players could come into Detroit immediately and be great standout stars for the Lions on the secondary. I think a secondary of, Jalen Johnson, Cameron Sutton, Brian Branch, and the safety core being Ifiatu and Kirby Joseph would be a great secondary for the Detroit Lions, and they wouldn't be giving up big numbers to big number one wide receivers anymore. And again, I think it is very much possible just because the Lions proved last season. They proved that they were going to spend big money in free agents. They proved that they wanted to address the cornerback situation more than any other position on the team, and it still continued to be a major problem. It still continued to be a major lapse on this football team. So I think Brad Holmes is going to come back even stronger this year, offer potentially even more money to a cornerback one. I think he's going to go out, and if L'Jarius Sneed is on the market, if Jalen Johnson is on the market, I think there is not necessarily a guarantee, but I think there's a strong chance that the Lions will show interest and they will at least throw their head in the ring and bid for a top free agent cornerback. But with all of that being said, those are my 4 splash players to look out for this season, right? I think Justin Madubuike could be an option for the Detroit Lions if he hits the open market, could really solidify the interior of the defensive line. I think Brian Burns is actually more likely to hit the open market than not, and I think he will be a free agent. I think the Lions will show quite a bit of interest. And whether or not the cornerbacks hit the market is yet to be seen. But if they do, you better believe that Brad Holmes is going to go after a cornerback. You better believe that he is going to get his secondary in shape, and he is going to give Aaron Glenn as much ammo as possible to go and shoot for a Super Bowl. So with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. If you have another splash signing in mind, let me know down in the comments below. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. Again, I tried to pick guys that I thought could potentially be on the open market, with Jalen Johnson not necessarily loving Chicago as much, with Brian Burns not necessarily loving Carolina as much, with the Ravens not having the most cap space in the NFL, and of course the Chiefs just having won a couple Super Bowls, maybe prioritizing a guy like Chris Jones over L'Jarius Sneed. I think there's a really good opportunity for all 4 guys to hit the open market, but of course that will be seen within the coming months. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. If you have a different splash free agent, let me know down in the comments below. I'm very curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.